I do not like dictatorships, but in my view, there is a single dictatorship that is somewhat defensible. Cuba. The Cuban socialists established an authoritarian regime, and they largely had to do so because the USA was desperate to remove them and would have done so easily had they been a democracy. Central to US foreign policy making is the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine essentially demands that all of the Americas be governed by US-friendly regimes. If the USA has no enemies on its own landmass, it can more easily project power abroad. This was a luxury that nations like China and the Soviet Union never enjoyed. This is part of the reason why the USA has always been so powerful. For the USA, this is a crucial part of its strategic policy, even if they may pretend otherwise. If Cuba was a democracy, the USA would have interfered. And by interfered, I mean they would have exploited the open political system and imposed a brutal dictator. In the chaos of a democracy, foreign interference is very easy. This is why countries like Ukraine and Britain have suspended elections during times of war. If Cuba became a democracy, they would have ended up like Chile. Chile had a democratically elected socialist leader, and in line with the Monroe Doctrine, he was removed in a CIA-backed coup and replaced by a brutal, right-wing dictator. If Cuba was an open democracy, they would have suffered the same fate. And the USA hated Cuba far more than they hated Chile, so the imposed dictatorship would likely have been far more brutal. I would rather Cuba be governed by a domestic socialist dictatorship than a right-wing foreign puppet dictatorship. Of course, now Cuba has no excuse to be a dictatorship because the Cold War is over. The chance of aggressive US intervention is far lower than it was. So Cuba should be democratizing. But during the Cold War, I am somewhat sympathetic to their case, even if I disagree with many of the regime's actions. What do you think? Is there a more justified dictatorship? Is dictatorship justified under any circumstance? I want to know what you think.